And we won
Oh,
it.
how's this?
Yeah.
All right. Oh, I'm excited now. Okay. Tonight we're delighted to have back with us Dr. Julia DeLancey from, she's a professor of art history at the University of Mary Washington.
Yeah.
So she's going to speak to us tonight about the Piazza San Marco. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. So here she is, Dr. DeLancey.
So it sounds like people would like me to use the microphone, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I will warn you all, I'm terrible with microphones, so what will happen is I'll forget that it has to stay here. So somebody just, when I start doing that, just remind me that I need to hold it. So you can actually hear me, so that it can actually function in the way that it's supposed to. Thank you all so much for inviting me to come, and thank you, Adil, for all the wonderful arrangements, and thank you to all of the tech people who managed to figure out why my sad little laptop was not connecting with the projectors. So it truly takes a village often, I think.
Yeah, just leave it.
Can't turn the whole thing off. So
Okay.
This is good.
People can see okay?
Yeah.
Good. I was telling folks earlier, I have been really looking forward to this, partly because it's been a week, and so I kept thinking, okay, if I can get through the week, then Friday I'll be able to see the Fredericksburg-Este people, and they're the really smart people who realize that everybody having a glass of wine before a talk is a really good idea. Including the speakers. So, in fact, I often at conferences will say, our sister city association does this great thing. So there may be organizations all over the country where they're going to start serving wine before talks. So just a little very brief background about me. I've been an art historian. I've actually been teaching at the university level for 30 years this year, which is, I feel deeply, deeply grateful. And I've been working on Venice since around 2001, 2002. I do archival research, so I go over and work in the Archivio di Stato, or the state archives in Venice. I'm not going to talk about that work at all tonight, but if people want to hear about archival research, I can talk about that. And actually, we won't really be talking about documents tonight at all, but I'm happy to talk about that. I've been at Mary Washington since 2017 and have loved being both at Mary Wash and in Fredericksburg. They're both just fantastic communities, and so I feel really grateful in those ways as well. So when Adil contacted me, I was thinking, what do I actually want to talk about? And I felt like I often was talking about objects and buildings. And for some reason, I was drawn to thinking about a space rather than an object or a building. And I'm teaching a Venice senior seminar this semester. I've got 16 students, so we're talking about Venice a bunch. And I had just added a day on Piazza San Marco on the syllabus, and I thought, well, let me see how that might work. So I'm going to keep things very informal today because it's been a week. I think I have plenty of material and we may not get through it all. If we get to the Q&A part and I haven't gotten through it all, I can give you a preview of what we could have gotten to if you want to just ask questions about those things. And I am happy to stay as long as you all have questions. So I think without further ado then, I will dive in. So this is our itinerary for today. As I say, it's very ambitious. We'll see if we can get to all of it. So I want to start out talking just a little bit about why Piazza San Marco. I want to locate ourselves really quickly. If you've ever seen me do a talk before, I really love using Google Earth to kind of get us rooted with where we're going to be. I want to say a little bit about how Venice was built, because there's a lot of misconceptions about how it was built. I'm not going to take a long time with that, but I think we have to understand that to understand some of the things that we're going to talk about in relation to the piazza. I wanted to also do a really quick aside about society and government in Venice. It's going to be like the 30,000 feet view, probably 5 minutes. Both things are very complicated, so I'll do a short version of that, and we can come back in questions. Say a little bit about the Basilica of San Marco and the Doge's Palace. I want to talk also about what are called spolia, and spolia are just ruins, things that have been taken from one place, moved to another, and installed in another place. And I want to connect that especially with Venetian power and Venetian identity. I have committed to myself that I am not going to talk about Venice without talking about the threats that Venice faces these days. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but then I want to conclude with some hope. And then I've got a want to learn more slide that's just some recommendations that if you feel like I want to learn more about this stuff, then you can learn more. Before I start, everybody still able to hear me, see the slides?
Yes.
You're as happy as you can be when you're listening to a talk on a Friday? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start out just briefly about why the piazza. So why talk about Piazza San Marco? So it is one of the oldest inhabited spaces on Venice and in Venice. We know that there have been structures. Traditionally, the argument has been that there were structures there since the 10th century and possibly earlier than that, but this great research project that came out in 2017 is an article. They found 2 peach pits in a particular part of the archaeological dig under the Basilica San Marco, and they were able to date those peach pits and push the structure and then habitation at Piazza San Marco all the way back to 650 to 770, a lot earlier than we thought. I want you to remember those dates because we're going to come back to them later. That's going to be relevant much later on. So one of those is it's a really old inhabited space in Venice, and we have to understand that to understand what's going on in the piazza. It has also been the inspiration and location for great art and architecture, and because of that, it's been a central point for Venetian civic pride. And so if we want to understand how Venetians think of themselves, one of the places that we can work to understand those things is in the Piazza San Marco. We'll look at this painting briefly later on. It's also been a space beloved for centuries. I decided, I don't know about you, I'm a little afraid of AI, so I kind of try it out now and again, and it's always with great trepidation, but I decided to try it out for this question that I had. How many of you have heard that Napoleon said Venice is the drawing room for Europe? A couple people. So Napoleon didn't say that. And actually, it was like this is one of the times that ChatGPT actually came through for me. So, French author Jacques Lecomte, who wrote in a guidebook in 1844, he claimed that Napoleon said that the piazza is a salon designed for the sky to serve as a canopy. And I love that image, that it's a gathering room, a social space, that there's no ceiling, it's just the sky. And then I also love that Lecomte added after that it's like a huge, delicious salon. And then other authors picked up on that. Henry James, probably one of the most famous ones. And Margaret Plant, who, if you're interested in the later centuries in Venice, her book, Venice, Fragile City, is fantastic. She argues that it kind of morphed into this idea that Napoleon said that Venice is the drawing room for Italy. But my point with this is this has been a space that has been beloved by people from all over the world for centuries. It also continues to be an important space for us today. I didn't know this until recently. Pink Floyd played in the Piazza San Marco in 1989. It's really wacky. So here's San Marco, here's the piazza, 200,000 people. And the Venetians were worried that the loud decibels from Pink Floyd was going to damage the built fabric. So they said, you have to be on a barge out in the bacino, the basin, which is this big body of water. So this is the stage that Pink Floyd was on. And these are all the boats that, I don't know how you got those front row seats, but then everybody else is kind of crammed in here in the piazza and the piazzetta listening to Pink Floyd, which I still think that's great. It is still the site, Ca' Foscari, which is one of the big universities in Venice. If you are a student at Ca' Foscari, your graduation is in Piazza San Marco. So every year there's students throwing their caps up into the air, and they set up chairs for all the family. How many of you read about the Jeff Bezos wedding this summer? Yeah, so this was, I don't know if you saw this, but Greenpeace Italia and another group that I don't remember the name of unveiled this huge banner, if you can rent Venice for your wedding, you can pay more tax. And so it's still a site, they chose that site for a reason. They didn't just randomly think, oh, we'll just randomly put it there. It's been a site, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. So I want to locate ourselves really quickly. How many of you have been to Venice? How many? Okay, that's what I was guessing. So you know where we are, but I also don't want to assume. And you may be like me, I forget where things are on the map, so it helps me to see things again. So Venice, of course, is up here at the top of the Adriatic, and I'm showing you this map because we're mostly going to be talking today about the period 1297 to 1797. And I'm not really going to be worrying about dates today at all. I'm going to be talking about the piazza as if it's always been the way it is now, but that's absolutely not true. And if you want to get into the changes, we can talk about those. The reason that I wanted to start with this slide is to remind you that for most of that time period, Venice was an empire. So there was not only the city of Venice, but she had outposts both on the mainland, but then all the way down here, down through Crete over to Cyprus. And a lot of that was so as they're shipping, and in particular doing trade with Constantinople, they wanted to have places along the way where they could stop to refuel and not have to pay customs duties and other things. And there's we could do a whole week of talks about Venetian foreign policy and war and how all of this happens. But this is just to remind you, A, that Venice is up here at the top of the Adriatic, and that it's an empire. So Google Earth reminds us Venice is in the Venetian lagoon here. There's the main island, which is composed of these two islands here. But then other islands, if you've been to buy glass on Murano, that's just out here. Funeral Island is here. Lots of other islands. Sant'Erasmo is over, I think it's this island, which is traditionally where all the vegetables were grown. There's a great, if you go out there, there's a guy who has a little ape car. Do you know what an ape car is? Little three-wheeled car, and he outfitted it to be a pizza oven. So if you go out there, yeah. I could do a whole talk about how much I love that idea, but I'm not going to. So here we're zooming in a little bit more, and of course this is going to be our target here, Piazza San Marco. And I want you to notice that if you're coming in from the Adriatic, you're going to come in along here, come in, and then you're going to come up this way. So Piazza San Marco is right where you would enter the city. Customs House is here, and then this, of course, is the Grand Canal. So its location in the city is very, very strategic. There's a great scholar named Daniel Savoy who's done a study of the way that Venice is designed to be seen from the water. Lots more to say on that. And then this is taking us a little bit closer here. So here's the piazza again. Yeah, okay. So first aside, I want to do a quick aside on building Venice, how the city, and I'm talking literally about kind of the land, so building the city. So it's important to say that the Venetian lagoon has been in flux for millennia, not millennia, hundreds of years, over 1,000 years. And it's changed dramatically, and it's changed partly because of natural processes like soil silting up, but it's also changed because of human interventions. Venetians have been managing the lagoon and the salt marshes for hundreds, if not over 1,000 years. And so this is really just to make the point, this is a map that's showing you in the early Middle Ages what we think the lagoon looked like, and this collection of little islands that you see here is what would become Venice. And then this is showing you, this is all stuff that's silted up later. So you'll notice here that there's these two separate lagoons, but before that, it was all one body of water. So when you think about the lagoon, it's important that you think about it as a space that's always in flux and always changing. Salt marshes are super important in all of this. I'm not planning to say anything about that, but we can get into it in the Q&A. So it's a little bit of a wonky picture, but the main point that I want to make with this is you'll see this dark outline again. The dark outline are the confines of the city of Venice now. Does that make sense? People recognize that kind of fish shape? Each of these white blobs is where an original island was before anybody came. Does that make sense? So these are all natural islands that were just there, and you can see part of the reason the Grand Canal goes the way it does is they were just navigating between those islands, right? So everything else, there was no land there. The Venetians created a surface that they could build on. And they did that in a really ingenious way. So they would take tree trunks, plunge them into the lagoon bed, and do that very, very, very close together. So this is showing you here and here, each of these dots that you see is the top of a tree trunk. So they're extremely close together. You cannot navigate a boat between them. If anybody saw League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, is that it? They have people driving submarines under the city, and you can't, that wouldn't work. And what happens when you put those really close together is that this area that's muddy and that you would normally sink into, it will hold weight. So this is showing somebody who's put a board over those trees at the top and is standing on top of that. It becomes very, very stable as a building surface. And in particular, it becomes stable because when the logs are plunged into the lagoon bed, they turn into petrified wood. So they become very, very solid. So it's a very stable building surface. They put other things on top of it, but it works really, really well. So if people tell you Venice is sinking, it's not because of this stuff. It's because the lagoon bed is collapsing. The geological substructure is compressing, and the water level is rising. So it doesn't have anything to do with how it was built. It has to do with these other forces. Part of the reason that I want us to have this in the back of our mind as we're talking about the piazza is because the Piazza San Marco is one of the lowest areas in the city. Part of that is because it's so old. Part of that is, because there's the weight of a lot there. But then we think it's also just a lower, geologically lower as well. Okay. So let's turn to get oriented to the piazza a little bit. So here we are right in the center. The Rialto Bridge, if you've been to Venice, big market area, is over here. This is the Arsenale, biggest industrial complex in the 16th and 17th century. Venice, at the height of the war in the late 16th century, could outfit a fully outfitted battleship, 1 per day.
Wow.
Anybody who's into the history of economy and industry, you should look at the Arsenale. It's a really, really remarkable place. The other thing I'll point out just really quickly, over here, this is the Church of, no, that's not right. Over here, this is the Church of the Redentore, Church of the Redeemer. It's one of the votive Palladian votive plague churches. There's a group, I think it's Gardens of Venice, who are very, very slowly restoring historic gardens. And the garden at the Redentore is one of the most beautiful gardens I've ever been in. It's not a fancy French formal garden. It's just stunning. And so if you're going and you want an out of the way place to stop, that's a really good place. So just taking us in a little bit closer. One of the things I want you to notice here are these umbrellas. Many of you may know there's these big cafes in the piazza. In fact, I was talking with somebody earlier about Florence. So these are these very, very famous cafes that have been gathering places, especially from the late 18th century onwards when coffee became much more popular. And then just orienting us again a little bit more. Just giving a slightly different view. So the other tip I'll give you is if you go a little bit, it's very hard to eat well around Piazza San Marco because it's so touristy, but there's a place right If you go through right here and just keep going straight, or send me an email before you go, you can get very, very good food, and it's not very expensive. So that's, keep that in mind. So this is just kind of a list, and we'll see if my attempt at fancy slides work. I wanted to kind of just quickly mark, I'm not going to talk about every building here, but I wanted to kind of quickly mark the buildings that are on the piazza, so you're just kind of aware of that. So, of course, the Basilica of San Marco, the church dedicated to St. Mark, Venice's patron saint. It is not the Cathedral of Venice. The Cathedral of Venice is out way, way, way out to the east, sorry. Nobody goes, it's an area that nobody went 500 years ago and nobody goes now. And part of that is an indication of their relationship with the papacy. Doge's Palace, so this is of course the seat of government. The Doge, we'll talk about the Doge in just a moment, but the kind of symbolic head of Venice. But it's important to stress that this is sort of like if the White House and the Congress were in the same building. So this is both the residence for the Doge, but also the site of all of the government offices and all the record keeping as well. Right here is the library. It's the Library of St. Mark, or the Biblioteca Marciana. It's still one of the national libraries in Italy. It's been open since the 15th century. It's a remarkable, remarkable space. So these two structures here, oh, there we go. Here and down here, these are these odd structures. They're called procuratorie, and there's the old one that's up here and the new one that's down here. They were residents for some of the government office holders second to the Doge. We'll talk about them in a little bit, but just briefly. The bell tower, famous bell tower here, which falls down in the early 20th century. If you're interested in architectural conservation, there's great stuff around that. And then the bell tower. Sorry, not the bell tower, the clock tower. The mint, just right down here. Two columns here, which we won't have time to talk about much today, but they're also a very, very old part of the piazza. And then there's two parts. This part here is referred to the piazzetta, or the little piazza. And then this is the piazza, so the main center here. So this is really kind of the ceremonial entrance into the city. So if you were coming as an ambassador, first of all, you would come by water. Mm-hmm. Nobody would come by land. You would come by water. And you'd come this way, and I want you to notice the way that the Doge's Palace is set back here. So that means as you're arriving by water, you're going to be able to see both San Marco and the Doge's Palace. Mm-hmm. And the main entrance is right here at this kind of hinge between those two buildings. And then you would carry on into the piazza if you needed to. And then if you went straight here, if you notice this straight street, this was one of the major shopping streets. When not Henry VIII, one of the Henrys visits Venice, part of his tour is being taken through this street, which had all of the most luxurious shops in the city. So that was part of what the Venetians were wanting to show, was not only this huge space, but also their success at trade and goods. And then this is just giving you a little bit of, giving you a map that has things labeled. I'm not expecting that you'll remember. You're not a class, so you can forget all of this in 5 minutes and it won't matter. So, okay. So I do want to talk about the Piazza San Marco as a public space, but I think in order to do that, I need to say a little bit about Venetian social organization and governmental organization. And again, this is generalizing a lot from that period, 1297 to 1797. So I'm treating that whole period as if it's static, and it absolutely isn't. But for our purposes, we'll just pretend that it's static. Couple notes about that. Venetians are going to think about civic, religious, and social as not necessarily separate things. So the city as a civic organization has a patron saint. The city as a civic organization has religious figures in all of their government meeting halls. All of the meetings would open with a prayer. So there's a very, very strong connection between civic and religious. The other thing I wanted to say is if you read more, and I hope you will, almost everything that I'm going to say on the following slides is subject to a lot of scholarly debate. So I'm giving you the kind of really fast and dirty version, but there, you know, if you were an audience of Venetians, hands would be going, no, that's not really true, or that's only true after 1572, or whatever else. But I think for our purposes, we'll just do. And then it's also the case that almost everything that follows was a lot more flexible than it appears from what I'm going to talk about. So just super quickly on social structure, and this is like the 30,000 feet social structure. So the traditional argument is that Venetian society was divided into 3 ranks. So the top rank was the patricians or the patriciate. They were about 2% of the population. And if you were a Venetian and you wanted to either hold government office or if you wanted to vote, you had to be male, you had to be Christian, and you had to be a member of the patriciate. It's also a closed class from 1297 onwards. So the Venetians realized that if patrician status is the key to power, they can't just have any old person becoming patrician. So they close it. They identify a list of families. They say these families are going to be the patrician families. They write it down in a book called the Libro d'Oro, or the Golden Book. And from thenceforth, only those families count as patrician. Except that the Venetians are really crafty. And they realize that patrician status, again, because it's the key to power, is something that people desire. And so there are times when they open up the patrician class and they say, if you've done enough, if you have enough money and you know you've lived in Venice for a certain amount of time, you can buy your way in. So it's sort of closed but sort of not. And that kind of thing is very Venetian, where they have, okay, here's what we're gonna say, but then we're gonna figure out all these other backways. The other thing that I should say with the government, and I think this is on the next slide too, is that they are very, very terrified of any kind of overtaking in terms of family power. They do not want families to have power because they've seen that happening in places like Florence with the Medici. And so if you're a patrician, they have very, very strict term limits, usually 6 months.
Wow.
So what that means is there's a huge amount of turnover. Class number 2 is the cittadini, and there's not really a good translation for that. It literally translates as citizen, but it doesn't work in English. That's about 7% of the population. They're the bureaucratic class. So you remember all that turnover?
Mm-hmm.
You've got to have somebody that remembers how things are done, right? And so that's the cittadini. They can't hold office, but they keep all the records, and they can decades. You can be the chancellor of the exchequer or whatever else for 20, 30, 40 years, but you can never hold office. They're also the highest class if you could attain if you were male and not Venetian. So if you were a Dutch merchant and made enough money so that you could build a massive palace on the Grand Canal, but you weren't born in Venice, you're never going to become a patrician, other than like maybe if you were there for a really long time. They're also closed, but the same deal as the patricians, except when the Venetians needed money. Then they would open it up and you could buy your way. So, and this, I will say, this class is the one that there's a, like, if I were giving you this description 15 years ago, it would not be the same. There's been a huge amount of change in how we understand that group. The last group are the Popolani, and that's everybody else. So like 91%. It's a hugely varied class, so it includes everyone from wildly wealthy non-Venetians, such as Dutch or Ottoman merchants who just haven't been in Venice long enough to become a citizen, all the way down to people who are begging for money in the streets. and everyone in between. So that's the quick version. The really important thing is this first point, that these class hierarchies do not always map onto wealth. So you could be a very, very poor patrician. If you were born into a certain patrician family, if you were born into the Zen family or the Bone family, and your grandfather really, really got into gambling and lost all the family's money, you would still be a patrician, but you might be living hand to mouth. Likewise, if you're Dutch and you've only been there for 5 years, you might have made a huge amount of money, but you're a foreigner, so you would not be, you would still be Popolani. The other thing that's important to say here is this is talking about the social structure for Venetians. And Venetians are one of the things that I love about them, and this is true then and even now, they're way more open to people of a wide variety of backgrounds. So they're a lot more open to diverse religions, they're a lot more open to people from different places, different practices, different bodies, all sorts of things. So they've got these strict rules, but then the reality is often it's pretty open and flexible. Yeah, okay, good. People good on that?
Yeah.
Okay. So the Venetian government is extremely complicated, so there's just a couple things I want to say about this, and you'll already have gotten a sense from the previous slide about the way in which social class and the ability to govern go here. We can talk about government. So Venice is ruled by a variety of councils and offices. The largest of them is the Grand Consiglio, which had over 2,000 members. That's basically any patrician man is in that council. This is their council hall. It's massive, 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 massive. And the ceiling paintings are by some of the greatest Venetian Renaissance painters, so Titian and Tintoretto and Giorgione. Actually, I don't know about Giorgione, but lots of, it's super important space for the city. We already talked about this one. The ability to hold office is determined by social class. So not everybody can hold office, but then those strict term limits. The exception to that, and this office has become a lot harder to talk about in the last 6 months for reasons that you the exception was the Doge, who was elected for life. And he was generally senior. He was generally somebody, you wouldn't become Doge until you were probably 65, 70, 75 years of age. It was largely ceremonial, except they also had a lot of power. And they swore a whole bunch of oaths, so this is highly symbolic. And one of the oaths, there would be a special illuminated manuscript created every time that a new Doge was elected. That it's a really significant source of work for illuminated manuscript artists, these manuscripts that record the oaths that people take. Talked about this one already, high turnover of elected patricians balanced by the citizen class. Venetians are also very acutely attuned to what's happening in public and what's happening in private. So this is part of this strict boundaries, but then also things being pretty open and flexible. And I've got just a few images to remind me to talk about this. So they have a whole system of denunciations, so they really want to make sure that people are kind of playing according to the rules. And so all over the city, especially in the Doge's palace, there are these denunciation boxes. So there's these little mouths, they're called bocche di leone, or the mouth of a lion. And so if you knew that your neighbor was cheating on his taxes, you could write a denunciation and say, my neighbor Brooks is cheating on his taxes. But you had to sign it. You could put it in the Bocche di Leone, and if your neighbor was found guilty, they would be punished. But if you were found to be lying, you would be punished. So there's this kind of secrecy. They don't want this to be public. They're not saying, please show up and denounce. Yeah. They want it to be happening in these boxes, but they're making sure that people aren't just willy-nilly accusing absolutely anyone. The other thing that they would do had to do with punishment. So they had certain crimes where they wanted you to be very aware that they had rooted out this crime. And people in that instance would be often, if it was a capital crime where they were going to be executed, they would be executed between these two columns. So very public and in front of the Doge's palace. So if you imagine if we had universal capital punishment in the United States and some people were executed in front of the White House, that would be the equivalent, because they wanted it to be very public. We have rooted out this crime and this person is being punished. However, if you committed a crime they didn't want people knowing about, and treason was the top one, they did not want people knowing that people had tried to act against the state. They would take you out in a rowboat in the dead of night and drown you in the lagoon and no one would know. So you're punished either way, but this public versus private is really important. And the reason that I want to stress that is because Piazza San Marco is kind of the public stage for a lot of this stuff, right? Last thing is the prisons. How many of you have heard about the prisons in Venice? You might have known about Casanova. So prisons in Venice are famous. They were famously awful and dark and dank, and they have torture chambers and all sorts of things. They were in the top level of the Doge's palace. So these are the prisons up here. They were called the piombi, which means the leads, and it's because they were under the lead roof. People were terrified of being sent there. The other thing, I don't have a picture of this, is the courtrooms in the prisons were directly connected. So if you were convicted by the Council of 10, and they said, okay, you, Pete Kelly, are sentenced to however long, you would not, there was no delay. There was a door in the back of the room, and you would be taken through the door and straight up into the prison. So it's a very, very close connection between the public pomp of the interior space and then this much darker and awful stuff.
Why me?
Because I happen to be looking at you and okay, so.
Was the church ever gilded like that?
Yes, so these are actually mosaics. So what you're seeing there are gold tiles, so clear glass tiles with gold leaf on the back. So yeah, and it still is. It's just this painting happens to like turn the volume on that up a lot. I was thinking I was going to talk about this painting more, but I think there's other stuff I want to do, so we can come back to this if we want. But the main point I wanted to make with this painting, this is have people seen this before? For Venetianists, it's one of the ones where we think, oh my gosh, really? Are we going to illustrate and use that one again? But it's so great for making the point about the way that Piazza San Marco was a site for public gathering and public processions. They would go through the piazza. This is a procession that's leaving from the Doge's palace. It's extending all along here. You can zoom into versions of this. There's all sorts of stuff going on. There's dogs and people looking out the windows, and really a whole bunch of women over here looking out. But it's a really important public site for civic expressions of civic identity. So it's where Venice performs, we are Venice and this is what we're like and this is how we do things. But because it's a public space, there are other things going on there. There's no way to close the piazza. It's open, anybody can come in. And in fact, early on, not now, but early on, a lot of the buildings over here were things like hostels, where if you didn't have a lot of money, you could stay there. There was a meat market over here, so like animal slaughterhouse sort of stuff. They cleaned that up later. But it's always been a pretty diverse space. There would be really wacky, this is an image from Shrove Tuesday celebrations. There were lots of protests in the piazza. There's a Dutch scholar named Martje van Gelder who's written a lot about protests in Piazza San Marco, because people who were hungry, they wanted to protest to the government. That was the place to go, because that's where they're going to see you. That's where the people in the government are going to see you. And in fact, in this image, you see this little group of people up here, and then down here, these are members of the Venetian government who have left their governing offices and are coming out and standing on this balcony to watch what's going on. So people understood that if they were going to protest, the piazza was the place to do it. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind if you're visiting there and are thinking just about the pomp and circumstance there, that it's been a site of lots and lots of different things going on. Okay. Just super quick on the Basilica of San Marco and Doge's Palace. I think I've said enough. And tonight we're not going to go inside either of them at all. That can be a different thing. But there's essentially, so there's Basilica here. I mentioned already, it's not the Cathedral of Venice. It's actually the Doge's private chapel. Think about that. It's also the site of the Venetian treasury. This is where, when they stole the relics of St. Mark from Alexandria and brought them to Venice, that's where they supposedly were according to Venetian tradition, restored. It's also where a lot of the stuff from the Fourth Crusade, we'll get to that in just a minute. And then the Doge's Palace, of course, and again, as I mentioned, that's Doge's residence, but also governmental archives and the prisons as well. So here's just a beautiful night picture of the exterior of San Marco. So here's the mosaics, you can see even better. Some of them are 19th century. They took down some of the earlier ones. We're gonna look at these guys in just a moment. Okay, sorry, I just had to remind myself where I was with my slides. So let me ask you one question. When you look at the facade of the piazza, does it look coherent to you? Does it look like, yep, it was all designed at the same time? No. No. Okay, so what are you seeing that's making you say no?
The mosaics are different.
Mosaics are different, okay?
Different arches.
So that's like Romanesque,
Arabic,
and this has a lot of Moorish influence.
Yeah.
Yep.
Moorish.
Yep, absolutely. Any other things, people? You're doing great. You all have A's. Yeah, so this is
This curious red, tall, Este has a huge red, tall pedestal like that in the middle of its square. I see this a lot in Italian spaces.
Yeah.
I'd love to know, and they're red.
Yep.
Almost universally red.
Yeah, and I don't, here's where I should say, oh yes, here's the explanation, and I don't have it. But I'll try to remember to look it up. So you all are absolutely right, and you're astute in picking out all of those things. This is the facade, especially where it's been altered over time. It's been altered over time a lot. Part of it is this is such an important space that the Venetians want to add things there that helps them to shape their identity. So in the same way, if you have a bookshelf at home and you put up souvenirs from a trip or pictures of people you care about as a way of showing your identity and your family's identity, that's exactly what's going on here. That they're using the facade, part of the most important part of the piazza, in order to express identity. I want to talk about, I've just got time for one example. And those are these, what are called spolia. So these are these things, again, that are taken, brought back to Venice and installed. Part of what's going on here, so these spolia, we're going to look at two examples in just a moment. These spolia, and the ones that the Venetians place the most prominently, are things that come from ancient Roman civilization. You remember when we talked earlier about that Peach Pit article, and I said pay attention to that date? Remember, it was 7th century, 8th century, right? The Romans are gone by then. So Venice doesn't even start until well after the Roman Empire has fallen. But the Venetians know, as good Italians, that any good city has Roman ruins. Rome has them, Florence has them, Pisa has them, Lucca has them. You can run down the list, boom, 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 boom. And the Venetians know that they do not. And so as the great merchants that they are, they figure out, we don't have Roman ruins, but we're gonna go get them. And this is one of the dark parts of, as much as I love the Venetians, this is not a moment where I love the Venetians. Because, so they built their own land, so they formed before, they formed after Rome fell. So, yeah, they literally built, yeah.
Chased by hordes.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
they're desperate.
Yep. So, where's my map? Okay, I had a lovely map of the Fourth Crusade, which seems to have disappeared. So, Fourth Crusade is fairly straightforward. They leave from Venice. They don't make it to Constantinople. Actually, no, I'm sorry, they don't make it to the Holy Land. They do make it to Constantinople. The Venetians are very upset and they loot the city, and it's very, very well documented. And it's not a good period in anybody's history. And they take a lot of stuff, and a lot of big stuff, and they take it back to Venice. Probably the two most famous examples, the single most famous example, are these horses of San Marco. They're beautiful examples of classical sculpture. They were part of a larger sculptural, so they're called a quadriga, and this was a team of 4 horses that would pull a chariot. So, like, think Ben-Hur, 4 horses along the front, and then somebody behind in the chariot. They would be, the chariot's gone, the charioteer is gone, everything else is gone, we've just got the 4 horses. And these had been, we think, made for the Hippodrome in Constantinople, so major site. And the Venetians know this, so they want these because they're gonna bring them back to Venice, and that then becomes, they have this Roman heritage. And in fact, they install them right over the door. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So you cannot miss them. The other one are these little guys here, and they're so charming. One of my best friends, it's her favorite sculpture in the whole world. So it's a sculpture of the 4 tetrarchs. So these are 4 ancient Roman rulers. Romans, the dark period in Roman history, they said we can't have 1 ruler, it's too much power, so we're gonna have 4. So you can't be 1 tetrarch, you have to rule together. And this is a beautiful porphyry sculpture. We don't know where they were originally placed, but we know that they were at the base of a column. So there were probably 2 columns on either side of a door, and the 2 tetrarchs on either side. This is also this thing that I love. When they took the statue, they missed one of the guy's feet, and they recently found part of his foot in a museum in Istanbul. So there's a museum in Istanbul that proudly displays that 1 tetrarch's heel. And so this looks small, but they are placed right here. This is the side of San Marco, and this is where the treasury is, so body of St. Mark, all that stuff. And right here is the entrance to the Doge's palace. So you would go by these as you were going from San Marco into the Doge's palace. So they're making sure that if you're coming, you're seeing these things that they have obtained, and you're thinking, oh, look, they've got these great Roman works. If you want to read more about that, there's a really great book called Venice and Antiquity by a scholar named Patricia Fortini Brown, who is, she's kind of the grand dame of Venetian art historians. Oh, just assume all is well. Okay. So, part of what I want to leave you with is this sense not only of the piazza as a site of an expression of civic power and identity, but also the ways in which that message is complicated by the other things that were going on in the piazza. So it's not simply just a ceremonial space. It's got these other layers to it very much. In terms of more present day though, I also want you to think of it as a fragile space, and a space that is very much at risk right now. Don't want to talk about either of these things in a lot of depth, but as I mentioned to you at the beginning of the talk, I promised myself that if I have a chance to talk with people about Venice, I want to talk to them also about the threats that Venice is dealing with. One of the biggest threats is from over-tourism. It is staggering if you're there in the summer, and any of you that have been in the summer know about it. It is heaving with people. There are lots and lots of attempts by the Venetians to try to have visitors to the city behave in ways that are respectful to the city and its architecture. They've started having various groups of people with little vests on that say "Respect Venice" on the back. Every summer they kind of go back and forth between being really vigilant and less so. They've also started charging an entrance fee. So if you come to the city and you're not staying overnight, you pay, I think €5 euros. €5, yeah. If you're staying overnight, you're fine, you're exempt, but you have to do a little bit of paperwork. They've gotten rid of the cruise ships. Cruise ships can no longer go through the Giudecca and the Grand Canal, and that's because of Venetian activism. But there's still threats to the water. I don't remember why I put the picture of the Calatrava Bridge in, but yeah. So that's we can talk about that if people want. Just some more crowding, huge lines. This is the line to get into San Marco. You need to reserve ahead of time, and this is the stuff that Venetians are dealing with every day in their city. People leaving trash, and it's not just the trash. The trash then attract rats, they attract pigeons, all sorts of things, and that's compounded additionally by the fact that over-tourism has led to a lot of reduction in Venetians being able to live in Venice. So people who own apartments realize, oh, I can rent it on Airbnb and make a lot more money. But that means that there's very few places left in Venice where Venetians can afford to live. The statistic that I often give I think it's 1950, the population of Venice was 170,000 people. Just last year, the year before, it dropped below 50,000.
Wow.
And the Venetians have identified that 50,000 mark as the city is no longer sustainable as a community. And in fact, there's some Venetian activists who had a funeral for the city the day that the population dropped below 50,000. I say all this not to be bleak, but just to say, like, if you're thinking about going, think about the way your visit is going to impact the city, and you're all going to be good visitors. You're not the people we need to worry about, but it's an issue in a lot of different ways. The other issue, of course, is the environmental threat. How many of you have heard of Acqua Alta? Do you know what Acqua Alta is? So the high water, the flooding.
Horn blows in the horn.
Yes, exactly, yeah. So this is the Acqua Alta it's a particular kind of flooding that happens in Venice when there's, the wind is coming in a particular direction, the air pressure is a certain way, and the moon's affected as well. And it's anything that's over 110 centimeters is considered, an Acqua Alta just means high water. This is showing you from 1870 to 2020, the instances of Acqua Alta in Venice. And you'll notice right here around 1970, 1980, it starts going head up. Here in 2020, we had 26 instances. This also doesn't get at this is just whether there was an Acqua Alta or not. Some of them have been hugely destructive. Some of you may have seen the photographs of the storm in 2019 when boats were blown up onto some of the pavement. They're still digging out from that. And the impact of that on the city is really significant. This is a plan that's showing you anything in dark blue is a very low area. What do you recognize where we've been looking at recently? Exactly, yeah. You remember it's one of the lowest parts of the city. And so what that means is when there's Acqua Alta in the city, San Marco floods right away. Yep. And this is what they do. They put up, so if you're a Venetian, and you're used to maybe 5 of these a year, and it goes up to 25, and this is not water that you can happily walk. This is not Yeah, the quickest way you can identify yourself as an outsider is to walk barefoot in the water. Don't do. But you know, these are all people who bought these plastic things to pull over your shoes. It's the impact on daily life is really profound. Now, of course, they've done the Moses Project. People heard about that. This project to build gates that close. They block off the openings in the lagoon that led the floodwaters into the Venetian lagoon, and they're working. I've been here and been there now 2 or 3 times when they've had to deploy the gates, and it works. You know, there's going to be Aqua Alta, there's going to be Aqua Alta, there's going to be Aqua Alta. Oh, we're raising the gates. They raise the gates, and there's no Aqua Alta. So it's kind of one of those things where it's notable because of its absence, if that makes sense. So that's a hopeful piece to that. This is just showing you a little bit of how, so there's these gates that lie on the bed of the lagoon. There's a pump that pumps, I think it's air, that then the gates raise up and they block off the lagoon. And then when the Aqua Alta's gone, they take the air out and the gates go back down and lie in the bottom of the lagoon bed. So it's been really effective. The problem is that the lagoon needs the tides to clean the ecosystem, and we can't keep closing the gates more and more and more because it's gonna damage the lagoon.
Right.
So. Okay, so I felt like I can't end there. I can't leave them there. So I wanted to just really quickly tell you about 3 great local things that are going on. So the Venetians are super resourceful. So there's a lot of really cool things that are going on. The Venetians trying to make things better. So Wetlands Press is a really great, it's a local press. It's started by Venetians, entirely staffed by Venetians. Everything is sustainable. Books are produced and printed in Venice, and they're working with some of the best scholars to do things about how we can try to save Venice. Very different direction, and I meant to bring one of my bags and I completely, oh wait, I have something. So it's a group called Malefate, which means badly made. And it's a project that started during the Venice Biennale by the American artist Mark Bradford. And he wanted to do something that worked with people who were in prison in Venice. And so he started a project that was taking, you know, if there's a building is being restored and there's stuff covering the scaffolding, they wanted to recycle that. So they take all that stuff, they collect it up, they cut it up, and then people in prison make things out of them. So this is a little zippered container. I have a big bag. Oh, so Pete, thank you, Pete. Pete is holding up a portfolio.
She brought
that's
me
from
things.
Malefate.
She was gonna put you somewhere.
And so it's a really great example of not only doing this kind of recycling stuff, but also benefiting people who are really in need of having this work. Unfortunately, they don't ship to the States, so that means you all have to go to Venice and go buy their stuff. And then the third one is this great all-women business called Row Venice that was started because there were these people coming in and saying, oh, you can kayak in Venice. And they're saying, no, don't kayak in Venice. That's not Venetian. We have a perfectly respectable way of rowing boats. And so they do rowing lessons for anyone who wants to take them. It's all women. And you can reserve them, and they will teach you in an hour to row Venetian. I don't remember the specific boat that they use, but it's a really, really great organization. And partly because part of their motivation is to preserve Venetian culture. Part of the reason they don't like the kayaks is it's not Venetian. It's taking away Venetian culture. This list could have gone on and on and on and on and on. But these are just 3 groups that I wanted to let you know about. And then if you want to learn more, these are some bibliography. The thing I really want to commend to you is this NOVA video. It's from 2023, and it's entirely about saving Venice. It's about the Moses Project and all of those other things. And what's great about it is they're featuring Venetian solutions, so Venetians who are figuring out what to do. And I can, Odile, if I email this to you, to this one, or I guess people can take pictures with their phones. If you want this, let me know and I can send it to you.
Email it.
There's also,
We can post it. Yep.
oh, excellent, okay.
If you'll just send it to us.
Yep. The other thing, the Fifth Siren is a really great podcast that's about kind of Venetian challenges. It's really dense, but it's really good. And then if you want to just kind of know what do Venetians say about being a respectable tourist, you can check out this Enjoy Respect Venice that's from the city of Venice saying, and they've got all sorts of tabs. And then the last thing, just because I felt like, wish we could all go to Venice together. These are just a couple recommendations. If you want a morning coffee or pastry, go to Pasticceria Tonolo. The Cicchetti Ombra Spritz, drink before dinner. There were too many places, so I gave you a whole bunch of different places. You'll notice there's no lunch here, and it's because the best place for lunch closed recently, and I'm still sad about it, and so I'm just pretending like lunch doesn't exist. And then dinner, if you want really old and traditional, Osteria da Cadroma is very, very good. It's been in business for longer than 100 years, same location. And then if you want something more creative, Anzolo Raffaele is also really wonderful. So that is everything I have for you all. Thank you very much.